Well, studying forest elephants is difficult. It's a lot of legwork and walking transects and counting piles of elephant poo and working out how long it takes a pile of elephant poo to decompose to the point where you don't see it. And then working out how many piles of poo each elephant produces in a day. And that gives you a measure, as you walk a transect, that much elephant dung must be produced by an estimated number of elephants. And what people have found in doing transects across these areas of forest is that the further away you are from human activity, be it fields or roads or pipelines, whatever, the more chances you're going to see elephant sign. But the elephants will avoid humans because we are terrifying to them. If they catch sight or sound or smell, in reverse order, if they catch smell or sound or sight, I'm thinking like a human, I've got to think like an elephant, of a human, they will of course move away if their only experience of humans is having members of their family killed. And that's what most elephants think about when they smell human. The death of members of their family and the impact that has on their society. So many of the elders have gone, and the elders in elephant society are the ones who know stuff and know how to react. And so you're left with younger and younger elephants dealing with what is for them a crisis. It has been going on for a long time. And the more remote the elephants are from human activity, the more likely it is that they'll be having a relatively normal life. But we like tropical hardwoods. I don't know if any wood in front of us is tropical hardwood, but you don't have to look very far to see window frames or furniture, and it's beautiful wood. It polishes it. If you like woodwork, you can get a nice shine on it. But those lorries you saw, where they don't even have a lorry, they just have wheels at the back and a cab at the front, and the logs are the lorry. You don't need a chassis, you just plonk the logs on. And those are everyday trucks carrying that timber. It used to mainly come to Britain and Europe. Now it's mainly going to China. But then it's made into furniture that we buy in Britain and Europe and North America. So we're still all responsible unless we can say, hand on heart, that the wood products we buy, or even the paper that we buy, comes from a certified, well-managed forest. That's the Forest Stewardship Council, FSC, is a familiar tick you see. You see the tick with a little tree, and that reassures you that your toilet paper or your hardwood furniture or whatever has come from a well-managed forest. But FSC certified timber is only a tiny proportion of the global timber trade. So most of it is coming from unregulated forests. And when they're unregulated and not, particularly in countries that have poor law enforcement capacity, then those lorries driving from the remote, formerly remote, now accessible parts of the forest will have tucked in between the logs bags of bushmeat or tusks or other products which are finding a market a long way away. And some of that bushmeat ends up in Europe. Every year, tons of African wildlife ends up in Europe because there are people living in Europe who within a generation were in a village in Africa. And when they have a special celebration, they want to do what their culture demands, and that's have a monkey for dinner or some species that has special significance to that particular family. And I don't want to demonize anyone who grew up in that particular kind of family, because if I'd grown up there, that's what I would be thinking too. But we do want to educate people as to the consequences of what we are doing to the Congo-Guinean forests. And as you saw from that map, it used to stretch from Senegal right the way across West Africa, broadening out over the Congo Basin, and then it hits the sort of the Albertine Rift, the Western Rift Valley, and then it goes into more savannas of East Africa. But that huge green belt, which is now more of a macrame belt, lots of holes because of human activity, plays a globally important role in climate stability and in rainfall generation. That's why I was suggesting that by the time you left here, you would understand why elephants are important. And gorillas are second only to elephants in their importance as seed dispersal agents. So tomorrow, it happens to be Endangered Species Day, which isn't exactly a celebration. It's noting that we are failing. If so many species are now endangered, threatened with extinction, some of them are extinct, and some of them are heading that way. And I wrote a blog, which you'll find on EcoFlix, like Netflix, but with eco in front, and an X at the end, EcoFlix, and on the Born Free Foundation website. It was interesting seeing that map of Cameroon, because Born Free has just taken on a huge project in the south of Cameroon around the Jar Reserve, a little bit to the west of the one that they were working in. And these reserves need to be joined up. You know, there need to be the opportunity for elephants to move as they would have done in the past when they felt like it. But the big news, not my blog tomorrow, I mean, I'm pleased that there's a blog, and it's looking more at gorillas than elephants, but the message is the same. We tend to think that endangered species need to be conserved because it would be a shame to lose them. And of course it would, and I absolutely agree with that. Or because the animals we consider beautiful, or inspiring, or scientifically interesting. In terms of the great apes, they share so much DNA with us, they are like our cousins. And blood's thicker than water. Elephants, very different branch of the mammalian evolution. But elephants and apes, and in the oceans, whales and dolphins, have all three groups independently got to a point where they have a complex society, communication, and grandparents. And that means culture, that means traditions, knowledge that's passed on, not just direct parent to offspring, but parent to grand offspring. And that's fascinating, because one of the characteristics that enables an individual to succeed in that kind of a complex society is self-awareness. That we used to think only we had. You know, we're the beings, all the rest are just animals. And you know, basically not much more than automata, just things moving around, but without any feeling or emotion or things that we think of as human. I would argue that all three of those groups, and possibly some other groups too, come into the beings category. But philosophical considerations aside, what I want to focus on before we go, and I will let you ask your question in a minute, is what they do. So the bar that we set for preventing extinction, the red list, you may have seen it, is sort of near threatened, vulnerable, endangered, critically endangered, extinct in the wild, where you've still got a few in captivity, and maybe one day you might put them back, and then extinct. That's it, they've gone. And so all that focuses is to prevent animals getting into the extinct and critically, the endangered and critically endangered category. And if you can prevent that, it's all right. Even if they once had 10 million individuals and now there's only a few 100,000, which is the case with elephants. We don't know exactly how many elephants there used to be, but probably across Africa, 10 million, and a few million across South and Southeast Asia too. But nobody was counting in those days, so it's all estimates. But if there were 10 million and now there's 400,000, we've lost 96% of Africa's engineers and gardeners. You heard them described as, look at hashtag gardeners of the forest. I use it a lot to draw people's attention to articles and research papers and films that explain that. So why does that matter? You would have all, I'm sure, been following the news last November of COP26, the 26th Conference of the Parties to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC. And just before COP26 was COP15. What? Yes, because each of the UN conventions has its own series of COPs, Conference of the Parties. Those are the decision-making bodies. They govern the convention. And climate change was considered such an important issue that they have their COPs every year, which is why they're up to 27 this November, COP27 in Egypt. And until COP27, the UK still has the presidency of the COP. So we still have some influence. At COP26, you heard a lot more talk about nature-based solutions than at ever any previous. At the Paris climate talks 5 years ago, there was barely a mention of biodiversity and wildlife and nature. Everyone was focused on carbon. But carbon sequestration and storage is just one of the ecosystem services provided by forests, and in particular by tropical forests. And as you saw, the trees vary hugely in size and height. But if you're in a tropical forest like those you've just been watching, and you find an old tree, it would take several of us, arms outstretched, to encircle the base of it, and it would likely emerge above the canopy of the surrounding trees and be an emergent. And if you were to do something as crass as scientifically drill a hole through the middle so that you can count the rings, you would find that it might be 600, 700, 800, maybe even 1,000 years old. And depending on the species and the nature of its seed dispersal, it was possibly an ecological event hundreds or even 1,000 years ago when an elephant ate a seed and pooped it out miles from the parent plant in a nice little pile of fertilizer, which gave that seedling the best start in life. Now, this film was finished in 2019, and in one sense that's a shame, because at the point that this film was finished, and then the pandemic hit and nobody got to see it much, a really important paper was published by an Italian biologist called Fabio Berzaghi. And Fabio had studied two patches of Congo Basin forest, one which had a population of forest elephants and one where they had been extirpated decades ago. And what he found was, where there were elephants, the above ground biomass, trees and branches and stuff, was 7% more than where there weren't elephants. And he interpreted that by saying, well, elephants eat a lot of vegetation, they trample a lot of vegetation, they're thinning the forest. And then they're turning that vegetation in their massive guts into first-class organic manure. And how much? Well, an elephant eats roughly 4% of his or her body weight per day. So a 5-ton elephant is eating 200 kilos of vegetation every day, most of which, because they don't have a very efficient digestive system, goes out the other end. And it's packed with seeds and it rots down and fertilizes the soil. So 200 kilos a day, that's a ton in 10 days. So depending on the size of your elephant, not every elephant is eating 200 kilos, but I use the back of the envelope that each elephant roughly is producing 1 metric ton of manure every week, 52 weeks a year. 52 tons of fertilizer being spread around the forest full of seeds. Thousands and thousands of seedlings, most of which are just going to get eaten by duikers and such like, who then produce dung, which feeds the big trees. And it's the big trees that have millions of leaves that are doing all the photosynthesis. But they're not just photosynthesizing and taking in CO2 and putting out oxygen and storing the carbon. That's what the climate scientists note that they're doing. They're also busy with what's called evapotranspiration. Lovely phrase, term, hyphenated term. So a combination of evaporation, the wet water on the leaves is evaporating, and transpiration, water being drawn up through the roots and put out through the little holes in the leaves, producing water vapor, which rises above the forest, and volatile organic compounds, which are also put out by the leaves. And these are chemicals which water molecules in the air coalesce around to form droplets, some of which will fall as rain. So we think of a rainforest as a forest that receives rain, but it's actually generating the rain by evapotranspiration of water vapor. And my friends and colleagues at the Global Canopy Programme in Oxford estimate that a unit area of tropical rainforest is putting 8 to 10 times more water vapor into the air than the same area of ocean. So we tend to think oceans are where water evaporates and then it falls on the land. But no, the forests. So if you've got a computer at home or a device in your hand when you have Wi-Fi next, go to Ecosia the search engine that helps you plant trees. I'm sure you all use Ecosia. And type in T341 rain. T341 rain. And at the top of the list of things that will, other search engines are available, but I like the one that plants trees. At the top of the list, you'll see an animation of global precipitation patterns. And it's speeded up. So each day is roughly a second. And it's a map of the world. Mercator projection, so not good at the top and the bottom, but you see weather patterns. And it looks like the Amazon basin and the Congo basin and the Southeast Asian rainforests are like pulsing like a heart. That's the daily rainfall, but speeded up, so it's a pulse a second. And you watch the weather systems moving off those tropical rainforests, and the Congo basin is sending weather systems across to the Amazon basin. I didn't know Congolese rain and Guinean rain fell in the Amazon, and then the Amazon basin is an even bigger pump, and it's sending water vapor off to water the Corn Belt in the Midwest, and then sweep across the Atlantic and water European fields and crops, and fill our aquifers and power our hydroelectricity. And this is what I observe in tomorrow's blog, that you're getting a sneak preview of tonight, that when we buy a bottle of wine or a loaf of bread or a unit of electricity, not one penny goes to protect the pump that sends the invisible rivers in the sky around the world so that they fall as rain and they form the rivers that we see because it's liquid water. And those huge, globally important machines have workers. And we've killed 96% of them. So if you have a factory with 1,000 workers and you, well, let's just say remove 960, productivity is going to go down rather a lot, isn't it? And we've already done that. So how do we restore the workers of the forest? How do we allow elephant numbers to recover so that they're at their optimum level to make these globally important ecosystems continue to support us all? So that's where the exciting things happen. Fabio published his paper. And around the same time, a gentleman who works, his day job is assistant director of the IMF, the International Monetary Fund in Washington, D.C. But a few years ago, he went on a whale watching holiday in Mexico with some friends who were whale scientists. And they're sitting in the boat, and there's a blue whale next to him. His name is Ralph Chami, C-H-A-M-I. And the scientists were all talking about carbon, and Ralph is, he's a blue whale, hey, why are you talking about carbon? And they explained why whales are really important in carbon sequestration. Because they produce, I'm thinking about elephant dung and how much a whale, the size of 80 elephants, produces. And they don't produce dollops that sit on the floor of the sea. They produce what are called fecal plumes. It's a lovely image, isn't it? Fecal plumes, which dissipate in the water and feed the phytoplankton, which does the photosynthesis, which is the basis of all the food chains. So if you've got lots of whales, you have lots of phytoplankton that is photosynthesizing, and it's estimated that phytoplankton in the oceans produce about 50% of the oxygen we breathe. So Ralph likes to say, well, every other breath, thank the phytoplankton. Every other breath, probably thank the elephants and the forest creatures that are dispersing the seeds of the trees. But we take those natural processes for granted. Ralph, as an economist, did some sums, and he came up with a calculation which astonished people, and he asked some economics professors, friends of his, to check the maths. And they said, what's this about? He said, no, I'll tell you, just check the working out, because he wanted to make sure he hadn't made a mistake. And the conclusion was that each individual whale in the ocean, great whales, it is responsible for the additional sequestration of about $2 million worth of carbon over the course of his or her life. So that puts a whole new picture on accidental whale mortality from ship strikes. Ships just have to get to their destination as fast as they can. Boom! They hit a whale. Oh dear, that's a shame. Didn't mean to do that, but no repercussion. If Lloyd's of London were to ring and say, oh, we hear you hit a whale, that'll be $2 million, please. Oh, does my insurance cover that? No. Okay, problem. So valuing individual animals for what they do for the planet could change the way we regard them. So Fabio had read this paper when he published his, and he said, look, I've just found that elephants are responsible for a 7% increase in carbon sequestration and storage. So, can you do some sums? And Ralph did some sums, and he worked out, well, it's not just the elephants today. Today's elephants have babies, and they continue doing that job into the future. But if you kill today's elephants, the future elephants ain't going to do that. So I think the term he uses, you discount back to the present the value of the future elephants, and he calculates that each individual forest elephant is worth $1.75 million if he or she is allowed to live their lives in the forest. That was in 2019, based on the price of carbon on the European exchange, which I think was about $23, $24 per tonne. It's now 3 times that, and it's going up. And it will continue to go up because last year in Glasgow, companies were falling over themselves to set themselves targets to hit net zero. They're unavoidable greenhouse gas emissions until they can change the technology and stop using fossil fuels. They are in carbon debt, and they can repay that by encouraging sequestration elsewhere. So suddenly, elephants' natural behaviour has a price. And if each elephant is allowed to live for 60 years in their natural habitat, we're talking about forest elephants here, we haven't yet done the sums for savanna elephants or Asian elephants, but it's likely that there will be a real financial value on living elephants, not for the elephant themselves, but the work they do. So for the first time, people are talking about paying the gardeners of the forest. But you will have noticed that elephants, although they have very precise opposing little flaps on the end of their trunk, so they could potentially pick up money, they haven't got any pockets. And they can't handle a cash card. And so the elephants are not going to handle the money. But the people who all those people, I want to embrace them all and say, look, if you're a poacher, you have exactly the skill set we need to monitor elephants, but you just don't kill them. We pay you to identify them. So there's a new initiative called Rebalance Earth. The Earth doesn't need rebalancing, it's our relationship with the Earth that needs rebalancing. And the website is easy, it's rebalance.earth. And if you go to Rebalance Earth and click on the mission, you'll see the timeline for how these ideas coalesced. And the thing that's going to make it hopefully different from other efforts to get large sums of money from corporations into forests, which are prone to corruption. You heard corruption mentioned lots of times. That's a very honest film. Many films will not talk about that because it's embarrassing, but it's true. So the other aspect of Rebalance Earth, I'm one of the co-founders because I've got the conservation and ecology background. Ralph is another because he's got the economics background. And when he publishes his papers on the IMF website, everybody sits and takes notice. If he was just an academic in a university, it would get talked about in a conference somewhere and wouldn't change anything. But it is changing things. And the third co-founder is Walid Al-Sakaf. And Walid is a blockchain specialist. Why is blockchain interesting? Because if the sighting of an elephant who is known, so one of our client elephants, is confirmed through photograph or through sound or through DNA, we know that he or she has been alive since the last time they were seen. Maybe that was 10 days ago. Now, at the 1.75 million valuation of the elephant's services, that works out about $80 a day. 10 days since this elephant has been seen and they're still in the forest, that's 10 days worth, $800, which can be released from the escrow account where this big corporation who's offsetting their carbon has said, well, we want to offset this number of tons. And one by one, our confirmation that elephants are alive and well, and providing that 7% bonus to the carbon sequestration of the forest, they offset their carbon. And the money doesn't end up in a big account somewhere. It goes using blockchain to the ranger who observes the elephant, or the farmer who sees the elephant raiding his crops and can't afford to put up electric wire. But wait a minute, this is one of our client elephants. There's a picture on his phone. And therefore, they get a portion of the money. Some of it will go to the government to pay the rangers who are civil servants. Most of it will go into local communities to generate jobs and lift people out of poverty so that they're not vulnerable to the next organised criminal gang that comes through saying, we want some strong lads to carry ivory, we'll pay you $50 a day. They're going to say, $50 a day? Come on, one elephant is worth $80 a day. Get lost. And when they redeem their asset-backed tokens that they get from this in the local store, the guy who used to keep a box of ivory under the counter because the next time the criminals pass through town, he could just quietly sell them some tusks. He will realize his monthly turnover is going up because of the elephants being alive in the forest and the world valuing the services they provide. So it's not going to make sense to sell bits of dead elephants when you get much more ensuring that they stay alive. And this is what Ralph calls his new economic paradigm, where you value living nature for the services it provides, rather than the current paradigm, which is all that beauty is worth nothing until you cut it down and sell the wood or the ivory or the meat. Or if you can get a tourist in there, they can enjoy the look of it. And that's like, well, so if a tourist doesn't see an elephant, it's not worth anything? It's nonsense. So tourism is a possible bonus. And my background is with mountain gorillas, where gorilla tourism has been their salvation and their numbers are increasing. But the gorillas that aren't visited by tourists don't have a revenue stream, and the villages that live near them are struggling to survive. But if we paid them, and I reckon about 20 gorillas equals one elephant, so a family of 20 gorillas is worth $5 million? Whoa! How do we translate that into equitable distribution? Using blockchain, where the people in the village on their mobile phone can see the blockchain as much as the person in the bank in Europe. So they're not being exploited, they're part of a collaborative effort. So that's the exciting bit that Mariah didn't know about, because she finished her film just before